When you look at the world, the first thing that deceives you is always the sense. Those impressions that rise uninvited strike the mind and convince you that what you feel must be what is true. But the senses were never meant to be the judges of reality. They were only meant to alert you, warn you, or inform you of movement and shape and sound. They were never meant to be rulers of the mind, yet most people hand them the throne without a second thought. What you see, you assume is the full picture. What you hear, you treat as fact. What you feel, you obey like a command. And then you wonder why peace is unstable, why fear grows quickly, why anger bursts out, why desire misleads, why confusion becomes a familiar companion. It is because you trust the sense before you trust the mind. Everything the senses tell you is incomplete. Every impression arrives without context. A look from another person might seem hostile, but you do not know their inner world. A sudden noise might trigger panic, yet nothing may be threatening you. A feeling of loneliness might convince you that you are abandoned, though many care for you. A pull toward pleasure might seem like happiness, though it may be the start of your decline. The senses are messengers, not judges. They carry fragments, not truths. They speak loudly, but they do not speak wisely. If you want to live with strength, you must learn to distrust the sense until the mind has examined it. Consider how easily a sound in the night can startle a person. The heart races, the breath shortens, and imagination fills the darkness with threats. The sense only delivered a vibration. It was the mind that painted a danger. But the undisciplined mind blames the sound. It says, "I reacted because I heard something." In truth, the reaction came from trusting the sense without questioning it. If you had paused for even a moment, if you had allowed the reasoning part of yourself to evaluate before reacting, you would see how rarely your senses deliver anything urgent. Most of what disturbs you is your own interpretation, not the stimulus itself. A person who trusts their senses blindly becomes a slave to impulses. They become the kind of person who sees someone whispering and assumes it is about them. The kind who feels a moment of sadness and concludes their whole life is falling apart. The kind who receives a small inconvenience and convinces themselves that fate is against them. The senses provide the spark, but the untrained mind spills the oil. If you wish to govern yourself, then turn inward and ask what is really happening. What is under my control? What meaning am I adding to this moment? Only then does the sense lose its ability to dominate. There are those who become angry because of what they see, someone who looks at them the wrong way, something out of place, a message left unread. But anger is not in the eyes, it is in the interpretation. There are those who become jealous because of what they imagine from their senses. A partner talking to someone else, a friend spending time elsewhere, a stranger glancing too long. Yet jealousy does not rise from sight, it rises from the mind's weakness. There are those who become fearful because of the unknown, a shadow in the night. A change in someone's tone, a shift in circumstances. The sense gives a signal, but only the mind gives it meaning. How many times has your sense deceived you? How many times have you misread someone completely? How many times have you assumed danger when there was none? How many times have you believed yourself weak simply because you felt momentarily tired? How many times have you believed a painful thought simply because it was loud? The senses whisper, and you bow. But that is because you have forgotten your authority. The mind is meant to be ruler, the sense is meant to be servant. A disciplined person does not deny the senses, they simply do not kneel before them. When the sense delivers an impression, The disciplined mind says, "Let me see what this truly is. Let me examine it, strip it of exaggeration, remove the emotion, extract only the fact." And once the fact is isolated, most of the disturbance dissolves. For almost all suffering comes from illusions created on top of what the senses deliver. And illusions grow only when the mind agrees to believe without examination. Think of the stories people build in their heads. Someone does not respond to a message, and suddenly the mind produces entire narratives. They don't care, they're bored, they're avoiding, they've changed. But none of this came from the sense. The sense only reported the absence of a reply. Everything else was imagination. A person sees others progressing, and immediately the mind fills the space with inferiority. I am behind. I am inadequate. I am not doing enough. But again, none of this came from the sense. The sense only delivered the sight of someone else's success. The interpretation came from lack of discipline. When you learn to distrust the sense, you do not become cold or detached, you become free. For the first time, you see events as they truly are. Someone walks away from you. That is simply a movement, not a rejection. Someone criticizes you. That is simply sound, not truth. Someone forgets you. That is simply a fact, not an insult. Pain arises. That is simply a signal, not despair. Desire appears. That is simply an impulse, not a command. You separate the impression from the judgment, and suddenly life becomes lighter. People suffer most because they fuse the sense with the interpretation. They do not pause long enough to ask, is this true? Is this absolute? Is this within my control? They assume what they see is the whole story. They assume what they feel must be real. They assume what they hear must be final. But nothing the senses deliver is complete, and nothing the senses deliver has the authority to determine who you are or how you behave. The senses also create illusions of urgency. The moment something feels uncomfortable, you react. The moment something feels pleasurable, you chase. The moment something feels uncertain, you panic. But urgency is often false. A craving is not an emergency. A fear is not a prophecy. A doubt is not a threat. The sense may scream, but the mind can whisper, and its whisper is stronger if you train it. A person who trusts their senses is pulled by everything. A person who trusts their mind stands firm, even when the senses are in chaos. If you want true strength, then develop the ability to sit with an impression and do nothing until the mind has analyzed it. When someone insults you, the sense delivers the sound. The mind should deliver the response. When someone praises you, the sense delivers the pleasure. The mind should deliver the caution. When someone rejects you, the sense delivers the sting. The mind should deliver the perspective. When life becomes uncertain, the sense delivers the discomfort. The mind should deliver the patience. The senses trigger, but the mind decides. Many people believe they are fighting the world, but they are only fighting their own unexamined impressions. They are not angry because of others. They are angry because they believed what their senses told them without question. They are not insecure because of circumstances. They are insecure because they allowed a feeling to define their value. They are not afraid of life. They are afraid of their interpretations. If they removed the false judgments, what would remain? Only events, only facts, only moments. None of these have the power to wound unless you give them the permission. Do not trust the sense when it tells you others are judging you. People rarely think about you as much as your mind claims. Do not trust the sense when it tells you you are failing. It only reports temporary outcomes, not the path ahead. Do not trust the sense when it tells you you are unworthy because of a single mistake. The sense does not understand growth. Do not trust the sense when it tells you something is impossible. It cannot see the future. Do not trust the sense when it tells you pleasure is happiness. It only measures surface, level reactions. And do not trust the sense when it tells you pain is the end. Pain is only a messenger, often a necessary one. The senses have destroyed many who were otherwise capable of greatness. Men and women have ruined relationships because they believed their anger without questioning it. Others have abandoned their dreams because they believed their fear without analyzing it. Some have become jealous, obsessive, or resentful because they believed their interpretations without verifying them. The senses provide impressions, but impressions are rarely accurate. They are quick, often irrational, often exaggerated, and usually incomplete. The mind exists so that you may refine impressions into truth. When a storm arrives, the senses react wildly. You feel the cold wind. You hear the thunder, you see the sky darken, and the body prepares for danger. But the experienced navigator remains calm. The storm is a phenomenon, not a verdict. What matters is direction, preparation, action, not sensation. In life, storms rise constantly. You will feel fear, anger, uncertainty, rejection, desire, pressure, noise. But none of these sensations tell you what to do. They only tell you what is happening outside or within the body. What to do is the responsibility of reason. You must build the habit of separating the impression from the judgment. Someone speaks sharply to you. That is the impression. The judgment that they hate you, disrespect you, or intend harm is optional. A door closes at the wrong moment. That is the impression. The judgment that you are unlucky or cursed is optional. Your plans fail. That is the impression. The judgment that you are incompetent is optional. You feel tired. That is the impression. The judgment that you should quit is optional. Life becomes peaceful when you stop adding unnecessary judgments to neutral events. Humans are the only creatures who suffer stories instead of events. A bird hears a loud noise and flies away. Once safe, it returns to calm. But a human hears a loud noise and invents 1,000 possibilities, many of which never come to pass. The suffering is not in the sound. It is in the storytelling. The sense gives a signal, but the mind writes a script. And that script becomes the prison. To escape the prison, you must stop trusting the first draft of the mind. You must rewrite it consciously. Every time the sense delivers an impression, imagine placing it on a table in front of you. Do not swallow it immediately. Do not react to it instantly. Examine it like a physician examines a symptom. What is the fact? What is the emotion? What is exaggerated? What is unnecessary? What can be controlled? What must be ignored? Most people do not do this. They react in the moment, as if every impression is an emergency. But the untrained mind reacts. The disciplined mind responds. The sense often misleads by focusing on what is visible. You see someone living comfortably, and the sense tells you they are happy. But the mind must ask what lies beneath. You see someone wearing confidence, and the sense tells you they are strong. But the mind must ask whether the confidence is a mask. You see someone receiving praise, and the sense tells you they are accomplished. But the mind must ask whether the praise is deserved. The senses show surfaces, the mind reveals depth. When you trust only the surface, you live a shallow life filled with envy, comparison, and illusion. The senses also mislead by exaggerating danger. A small challenge feels unbearable. A temporary setback feels permanent. A minor criticism feels devastating. A single rejection feels like the end. But the mind must correct the distortion. Ask yourself, has this not happened before? Did I not survive worse? Will this matter in a year? What part of this is within my control? What part of this is merely discomfort? Once the mind intervenes, the sense loses its grip. There is a profound power in learning to pause between perception and reaction. The pause is where wisdom enters. The pause is where illusions dissolve. The pause is where emotion is separated from fact. The pause is where the sense is held at a distance long enough for the mind to evaluate it. Without the pause, you live like a leaf thrown around by the wind. With the pause, you live like a mountain unmoved by storms. When someone provokes you, the sense urges you to retaliate. But the mind, if allowed, will ask, is this worth my energy? Does this reflect my character? Will reacting help or harm? When someone disappoints you, the sense urges you to withdraw, resent, or judge. But the mind will ask, have I never disappointed others? Is this person malicious or simply flawed like everyone else? When life becomes difficult, the sense urges you to despair, but the mind will ask, is adversity not the furnace that shapes strength? The sense drives reaction, the mind drives mastery. You must also be cautious with pleasant sensations. People think pain is the only deceiver, but pleasure can be far more destructive. Pleasure convinces you that comfort is success. Pleasure convinces you that indulgence is harmless. Pleasure convinces you that desire is purpose. Pleasure convinces you that the easy path is the right one. Many have been ruined not by hardship but by ease. When the sense whispers pleasure, the mind must whisper discipline. Do not trust pleasure when it tells you that you have arrived. Do not trust pleasure when it tells you to slow down. Do not trust pleasure when it tells you that effort is no longer needed. Growth often hides behind discomfort. Destruction often hides behind pleasure. To distrust the senses does not mean to live suspiciously, but to live consciously. It means you do not jump to conclusions. You do not let emotion lead your judgments. You do not allow impulses to dictate your direction. You do not treat every sensation as truth. You observe, you analyze, you choose. This is what separates the strong from the frantic, the grounded from the reactive, the wise from the impulsive. Many people think freedom is the ability to chase whatever they feel. But true freedom is the ability to ignore what you feel when it misleads you. True strength is the ability to act rightly even when the senses scream otherwise. The body may feel fear, but the mind can choose courage. The heart may feel pain, but the mind can choose stability. The eyes may see obstacles, but the mind can choose persistence. The senses may tempt you toward ease, but the mind can choose discipline. Freedom is not the absence of sensation, it is independence from sensation. Train yourself daily to treat impressions as hypotheses, not commands. When you feel anger, ask why. What is the fact? What is my interpretation? When you feel fear, ask, what is the actual threat? Am I reacting to reality or imagination? When you feel desire, ask, will this bring growth or only temporary comfort? When you feel sadness, ask, what thought is fueling this? Is the thought true? When you feel doubt, ask, what evidence supports this? What evidence contradicts it? You interrogate your impressions until their distortions are revealed. Once exposed, they lose their power. People often say, this person made me angry, or this situation made me anxious, or this event ruined my day. But nothing outside you has the power to control your inner state unless you give it permission. What disturbed you was not the person, not the situation, not the event. What disturbed you was the meaning your senses assigned before your mind intervened. Every disturbance is self-inflicted, and though that sounds harsh, it is the source of your freedom. If your suffering comes from within, then the cure also lies within. If the cause is internal, then so is the solution. The senses can be allies when kept in their proper place. They alert you to danger, remind you of beauty, allow you to engage with the world. But they must serve the mind, not override it. Just as a ruler would not consult a soldier for philosophical matters, you should not consult your senses for truth. They provide data, not wisdom. They provide impressions, not judgments. They provide sensations, not meaning. The mind is the interpreter, the judge, the architect of response. When the mind leads, the senses become useful. When the senses lead, the mind becomes chaotic. Life becomes calm when you stop reacting instantly to everything that touches your senses. You do not need to respond to every message the moment it arrives. You do not need to react to every emotion the moment it appears. You do not need to believe every thought the moment it arises. You do not need to chase every pleasure the moment it tempts you. You do not need to fear every uncertainty the moment it presents itself. You become powerful when you choose your responses deliberately, not automatically. When you distrust the senses, you begin to see people more clearly. You no longer assume their expressions reflect their intentions. You no longer take their tone as a reflection of your worth. You no longer let their moods dictate your own. You learn to separate yourself from their impressions. You understand that everyone is fighting an internal battle. Their anger may come from their own pain. Their silence may come from their own confusion. Their distance may come from their own burdens. The sense may tell you they do not care, but the mind must ask for evidence before accepting the verdict. You also begin to understand yourself better. You realize your emotions are not you, they are signals. Your fears are not you, they are protective patterns. Your desires are not you, they are impulses. Your doubts are not you, they are echoes of past wounds. The senses produce these states, but the mind can observe them without obedience. When you stop identifying with sensations, the heart becomes lighter. You see that feelings rise and fall like waves. You remain the shore unmoved. In the end, all strength comes from mastering the distance between impression and judgment. A weak person fuses them. A strong person separates them. A weak person reacts. A strong person responds. A weak person is moved by every sensation. A strong person is guided only by reason, clarity, values, and truth. The senses are not enemies, but they are unreliable allies. Treat them with caution, question their messages, and allow the mind to lead. Only then will you walk through life untouched by chaos, unmoved by noise, unshaken by illusions. Only then will you become the master of yourself, rather than the slave of impressions. Only then will you understand what true inner freedom is and why so few achieve it. In learning not to trust the sense blindly, you reclaim your ability to see life as it truly is, not as it appears in the first distorted glance. And through this discipline, you build a life rooted not in reaction, but in reason. There will always be moments when the senses attempt to overwhelm you with immediacy. A harsh word enters your ears, and the body reacts before the mind even wakes. A sudden disappointment strikes your heart, and the sense of loss tries to command your thoughts. A moment of temptation stirs the nerves, and without discipline, a person obeys the sensation rather than questioning it. This is how people drift away from their purpose, not through grand failures, but through small unquestioned impressions. The senses whisper constantly, and constant whispers shape character if the mind remains passive. You must become vigilant, not fearful, but aware. You must learn to catch the impression at the very moment it arises. You must learn to say, "This is only a feeling," not a fact. This is only an impulse, not a command. This is only a sensation, not a truth. So much of human suffering comes from confusing the temporary with the permanent. A painful moment feels like a painful life. A lonely evening feels like a lonely future. A slight discomfort feels like a sign of collapse. A minor setback feels like destiny changing course. But these reactions arise because the senses are powerful in the present. They pulse, they sting, they shout. They convince you that what you experience now will continue forever. They do not understand time. They do not understand change. They only understand the moment. And if you trust the senses, you will be trapped inside each moment without perspective. You will treat every emotion as a prophecy. You will treat every discomfort as a warning. You will treat every impulse as a revelation. But none of these are reliable. The sense knows only the surface of the present, while the mind knows the arc of your entire being. The senses are limited because they cannot see beyond themselves. They cannot interpret intention. They cannot measure character. They cannot discern opportunity. They cannot predict outcomes. They cannot understand meaning. They cannot grasp the invisible forces that shape your life. A person may look powerful and be hollow inside. A person may look calm and be breaking silently. A person may look confident and be lost. A situation may appear hopeless and yet contain hidden opportunity. A rejection may feel painful and yet be the beginning of your greatest transformation. A failure may sting your senses and yet build your strength. If you trust only what you feel, you will never understand what you are becoming. There are people who live entirely at the mercy of their senses. They wake up feeling tired and assume they are weak. They feel anxious and assume danger is near. They feel desire and assume they must satisfy it. They feel hurt and assume revenge is necessary. They feel bored and assume they lack purpose. They feel insecure and assume everyone is superior. They feel rejected and assume they are unworthy. These individuals do not live with reason. They live with reactions. They do not live with clarity. They live with impressions. They do not live with leadership. They live with impulses. And the world remains heavy for those who trust what is momentary rather than what is true. Strength begins the moment you interrupt the senses. When fear appears, you pause and examine it. When anger rises, you step back and question it. When desire pulls you, you challenge it. When sadness arrives, you observe it without drowning in it. When pride inflates you, you bring it down with perspective. When doubt whispers, you drown it with evidence. When impatience pushes you, you remind yourself of the long view. The senses try to create urgency. The mind must create understanding. The senses try to create panic. The mind must create order. The senses try to create stories. The mind must create truth. Even physical sensations are unreliable when left unchecked. Hunger can feel like necessity even when it is habit. Exhaustion can feel like inability even when it is merely discomfort. Pain can feel like limitation even when it is growth. The senses interpret discomfort as danger, but discomfort is often the birthplace of your strength. Those who avoid discomfort because of their senses never discover their true potential. They flee from progress because it feels unpleasant. They run from discipline because it feels restrictive. They abandon routines because they feel heavy. They escape challenges because they feel intimidating. They choose ease because it feels comfortable. But life shaped by feelings is a life shaped by avoidance. To grow, you must do what the senses resist. You must rise when the senses scream to stay down. You must work when the senses whisper that you are tired. You must persevere when the senses beg you to quit. You must remain calm when the senses demand reaction. You must listen to reason when the senses pull you toward chaos. This is not self-punishment, it is self-governance. It is proving to yourself that you are more than sensations, pulsing through a temporary body. It is showing the world that your principles are stronger than your impulses. It is demonstrating that discipline governs your life more deeply than comfort does. The senses often create illusions of threat. A person's silence feels like rejection. But silence can mean many things: reflection, exhaustion, distraction, or nothing significant at all. The senses posture fear because they lack information. The mind must investigate before believing. A missed opportunity feels like catastrophe, but the mind must ask if it was truly yours or simply an illusion of timing. A harsh comment feels like truth, but the mind must separate opinion from reality. A mistake feels like identity, but the mind must distinguish actions from self-worth. A loss feels like the end, but the mind must examine what remains. The more control you give to the senses, the louder they grow. The more control you give to reason, the quieter the senses become. This is why emotional discipline is not about suppressing sensations, but about placing them in their rightful place. You allow the senses to inform you, but not rule you. You acknowledge feelings without obeying them. You observe reactions without believing them. You treat emotions as visitors, not owners. You treat impulses as suggestions, not commands. In doing so, you move through life with clarity instead of confusion. You must remember that what feels urgent is often trivial, and what feels trivial is often important. The sense tells you that a notification is urgent, but your mind knows that your purpose is more valuable. The sense tells you that instant pleasure is important, but your mind knows that long-term integrity matters more. The sense tells you that someone's opinion of you is vital, but your mind knows that character outweighs approval. The sense tells you that you are missing out, but your mind knows that nothing essential can be taken from you. The sense tells you that comfort is success, but your mind knows that growth is forged in adversity. The senses mislead also because they glorify the external and neglect the internal. They obsess over appearances, over how things look, over the aesthetic of success. They cling to pleasure because they cannot comprehend purpose. They chase validation because they cannot comprehend self-worth. The senses can tell you how something appears, but only the mind can tell you what something means. Only the mind can measure integrity. Only the mind can judge alignment. Only the mind can understand value. Only the mind can transform life into something deeper than impressions. One of the greatest skills you can develop is the ability to contradict your senses for the sake of your values. When the body feels tired, but your purpose requires effort, you choose effort. When the heart feels offended, but wisdom requires patience, you choose patience. When the senses beg for comfort, but discipline demands persistence, you choose persistence. When emotions flare but calm reasoning is needed, you choose clarity. This is how you build power, by proving repeatedly that sensations cannot sway you from what is right. If you cannot resist your senses, the world will control you effortlessly. People will manipulate you with flattery. They will intimidate you with tone. They will provoke you with insult. They will mislead you with appearances. They will distract you with desires. They will influence you with fear. But if you master your senses, nothing external can puppet your inner world. No voice can enter your mind without your permission. No impression can decide your direction. No circumstance can dictate your reaction. No sensation can override your reason. The senses have trained most people to respond instantly, speak immediately, react immediately, judge immediately, assume immediately, fear immediately. But immediacy is the enemy of wisdom. You must slow the world down internally. Let others rush, you remain steady. Let others assume, you remain observant. Let others panic, you remain grounded. Let others react, you remain controlled. The slower you are to react, the more control you have over your life. The people who seem strongest are not those who feel nothing, but those who do not obey everything they feel. When you practice doubting the senses, you begin building an inner space, an internal room where impressions cannot enter without examination. This room becomes your strength. It is where you retreat when the world grows chaotic. It is where you think when the senses try to confuse you. It is where you reset when emotions rise. It is where you plan when fear attempts to stop you. In that space, only truth enters, only clarity enters, only reason enters, and anything unworthy is left at the door. With time, you learn to anticipate the tricks of the senses. You recognize that pain speaks in exaggerations. You recognize that fear speaks in predictions that never come true. You recognize that anger speaks in false importance. You recognize that desire speaks in promises it never fulfills. You recognize that insecurity speaks in illusions of inadequacy. And once you see the pattern, you are no longer fooled. You become the master of the impression rather than a servant to it. Life becomes more peaceful when you realize sensations are temporary, but decisions are permanent. A feeling lasts minutes, but an impulsive reaction can last years. A moment of anger can destroy a relationship. A moment of fear can sabotage an opportunity. A moment of doubt can kill a dream. A moment of desire can create regret. But a moment of clarity, just one, can save you from these things. The key is to distrust the sense long enough for clarity to appear. The senses tell you how you feel, but they cannot tell you what is right. They tell you what is happening, but they cannot tell you how to respond. They tell you what is pleasant, but they cannot tell you what is meaningful. They tell you what is scary, but they cannot tell you what is worth facing. They tell you what hurts, but they cannot tell you what matters. Only the mind, disciplined, calm, trained, and independent, can make decisions aligned with your highest self. The senses belong to the body, but the mind belongs to you. The senses feel, but the mind decides. The senses tremble, but the mind stands firm. The senses fluctuate, but the mind can remain steady. The senses chase, but the mind chooses. The senses overwhelm, but the mind orders. The senses scream, but the mind speaks truth. And when the mind leads, life becomes something the senses cannot control. In the end, distrust of the senses is not about denying your humanity, but about elevating it. It is about freeing yourself from impulses that do not serve your growth. It is about choosing who you are instead of letting impressions choose for you. It is about rising above instinct and living by principle. When you stop trusting the senses blindly, you begin trusting yourself more deeply. You become someone who cannot be swayed by every emotion, every voice, every circumstance, or every fleeting impulse. You walk with a calm that others cannot understand because they are still enslaved to their impressions. And through this discipline, you gain something far more valuable than comfort or ease. You gain mastery over the one thing no one else can touch: your inner world.